Okay, today we're looking at 1.5. And so I showed you this note sheet last class period. We did order of operations. Today we're going to be looking at the sign rules and this double negative rule. So I'm going to kind of fold it in half this way today. So today we're looking at our sign rules, and we're just going to be dealing with adding and subtracting today. So one of the biggest problems with students is not knowing their sign rules. This lesson and tomorrow's lesson are really the most important lessons for you to be successful in math. If you can't do your sign rules, you're going to have trouble from here on out as far as ever getting the right answer. And so we're going to kind of slow it down, take it slow, and make sure that we get these down. So today we're just looking at adding and subtracting, so I'll cover up these. So the rules for adding and subtracting say, if the signs are alike, add and keep the same sign. If the signs are different, subtract and take the sign of the larger. And that just comes from things like, if you just think about in nature, if people are, things that are alike you can add together, and if they're different, there's a conflict, and they're always having trouble combining their thoughts. So we're kind of use that basic thought process to use when we're looking at problems. So when we look at this, these are all the same numbers, 3 and 4, but with different signs and different combinations. Well, this first one, 3 plus 4 is 7. I don't think anybody would ever miss that, but it actually has to do with the rules. This, let me do this in red. This sign plus goes with that 4, and 3 doesn't have a sign, so it's assumed to be plus. So anytime you don't have a sign, it's assumed to be a positive. But when you're looking at your rules here, the signs are alike, so you add and keep the same sign. It doesn't show there, but it's assumed to be a positive. But on this next one, do you see this is a -3 and a +4? The sign in front of it goes with that number. So when we look at these, we're going to say the signs are different because one's negative, one's positive. So you take the numbers 4 and 3. Don't think about the signs. Just think of 4 and 3 and subtract them. 4 minus 3 is 1. Then you look and take the sign of the larger. Do you see that 4 is the bigger digit there? So since 4 is positive, 1's going to be positive. Again, you don't have to write that positive. It's assumed to be that way. You only have to write it if it's a negative. So the signs were different, so we subtracted and took the sign of the larger. This next one, this is a -3 and a -4. They're both negative, so we say the signs are alike. So we add 3 plus 4 is 7 and keep the same sign. They were both negative, so it just stays a negative. And then this next one, this is like a +3 and a -4. So we look at those and say the signs are different, so we're going to subtract them. 4 minus 3 is 1. But you take the sign of the larger. Do you see the 4 is the larger digit and it's negative, so the answer for this one's going to be negative. So those are all those combinations. So I want you to get in the habit of saying those things in your head. Signs are alike, add and keep the same sign. Different, subtract and take the sign of the larger. Or you can print this out and keep it on your desk for as long as you need until you feel comfortable with it. This next one has to do with this statement right here. To remember, a double negative becomes a positive. So if you look at this next problem, this over here, this is what I mean by a double negative. It's two negatives right next to each other, or they're really multiplied by each other, which we'll cover that on the next lesson. But the easiest thing to think of is anytime you have two negatives together, they just become a positive. And so this becomes a -2 and a +5. Those two negatives became a positive, so the parentheses there could disappear. And now we look at -2 and +5. The signs are different, so we subtract 5 minus 2 is 3 and take the sign of the larger number, which is positive. Again, you do not have to write that positive there. Okay, this next one, now we have to remember everything we've learned on the sheet. We've got to remember order of operations, and we've got to remember our sign rules. So kind of have this out to the side if you want, but on this next problem, we've got to follow our order of operations, which says to do parentheses first. So this is my parentheses. So this 3 and this plus come down. And then inside the parentheses, I say 8 minus 4 is 4. So I did step 1, the parentheses. There's not any exponents. There's not any multiplying and dividing. So we can just add and say 3 plus 4 is 7. So keep those notes off to the side there. This next one, order of operation, tells me I go to parentheses again, but this negative, 10, and this negative all come down. And this is really important. If people make a mistake, it's usually that they don't bring that one down, and I'll show you why here in a minute. Because when we look inside here, this is like a positive 3 and a negative 9. Oops, the signs are different, so we subtract. 9 minus 3 is 6, and take the sign of the larger one, which is negative. So do you see that parentheses became a negative 6, but you also had to bring down this negative out down here. So if you missed this problem on your practice problems, that's probably the reason. So we got rid of our parentheses, but now we learned a double negative becomes a positive. So this becomes a negative 10 plus 6. And now we can use our sign rules. The signs are different. So we subtract. 10 minus 6 is 4. And take the sign of the larger number, which was negative. 10 is bigger than 6, so we're going to take the sign of the 10. Okay, let's move up a little bit more. Now let's look at one that's a fraction. So again, we're reviewing back to 1.1. And so with fractions, really it's the same thing, just in the last step, you're going to use your sign rules. So when we look at 4 and 2, we can't add them because they're not the same. We need a common denominator. Your multiples of 2 are 2 and 4, so the common denominator is 4. So we're going to make our denominators 4. I'm going to go through this a little faster because hopefully you're getting it down by now. The first denominator did not change, so the top doesn't have to change. And I always put the negative up in the numerator. You can have it out to the side, but your eye kind of loses it. So I always put the negative up next to that 1 because that's where you're going to use it. But on this one, to get from 2 to 4, I need to multiply by 2. So I have to do the same thing to the top. 1 times 2 is 2. Now we have a common denominator, so it just comes down. And then we use our sign rules. This is a negative 1. And this is a positive 2. So we say the signs are different. So we're going to subtract and take the sign of the larger, which is that positive 2. So nice review there of fractions. Okay, this next one, now we're back to, so we don't get to forget anything we learned. With this one, we got to do our order of operations, which tells us to do our parentheses first. So with inside the parentheses, we say the signs are alike, add, and keep the same sign, and then bring down your plus 5. And then we say the signs are different, subtract, and take the sign of the larger. And that's your answer. Now this next one looks a little complicated, but it's parentheses and negatives and all that. So let's just first notice this double negative right here. So you can simplify this whole thing by just making this a 1/3 plus a 1/2, because that double negative becomes a positive. Then we need to find a common denominator of 3 and 2, which is going to be 6. Again, hopefully you're getting to where you know those, and that's because your multiples of 6 are 2, 4, and 6, and your multiples of 3 are 3 and 6. 6 is your common denominator. So to get from 3 to 6, I need to multiply by 2. So I do the same thing to the top. So you really are just multiplying your number. 2 times 1 is 2, and that negative just comes down. And then on this next one, to get from 2 to 6, I need to multiply by 3. So I have to do the same thing to the top. 1 times 3 is 3. And now the denominators are the same, so I can just rewrite the denominator. And now I'm just doing my sign rules. This is a negative 2, and this is a positive 3. So the signs are different, so I subtract. 3 minus 2 is 1, and take the sign of the larger, which was positive. Okay, last one. A little bit more going on here, but we're still going to use our order of operations. So what do we do first for order of operations? Parentheses. So I'm going to do this right here and this right here, and everything else is going to come down. The negative 2, the plus, the bracket, this minus, and that bracket. Do you see everything comes down except those parentheses? Then within this parentheses, I have a negative 3 and a negative 2, so I say the signs are alike, add, and keep the same sign. Again, that negative comes down, and then this parentheses, the signs are different, subtract, and take the sign of the larger. It's important you have all those signs there, because now what happens? This double negative becomes a positive. You don't have to show this step, but I'm just going to rewrite it just to show you that this becomes a +3. You could skip this step if you wanted to, because you could do that in your head. A lot of people just like to make a big plus there, which is fine too. Now we still have a parenthesis, so we got to do this inside this parenthesis. So this -2 comes down in this plus, and because there's not a number there, this doesn't mean multiplication, so we don't have to bring down the brackets. We just say the signs are different, so we subtract 5 minus 3 is 2, take the sign of the larger, and now we have a -2 plus a -2. So I did want to show you, when you have two negatives, it always becomes a positive, because think about, negative means the opposite. So the opposite of a negative is a positive. But a positive doesn't change anything. And so anytime you have a plus a negative, you can just kind of ignore that positive, because you're just saying this is a negative and this is a negative. The signs are alike. Whoops, wrong color. Add and keep the same sign. So if you have plus a negative, it's telling you to add them, which we did add them. The signs were alike, so we added and kept the same sign. And so that's 1.5. So again, like I've talked about before, you must show your steps on your take-home quiz and your practice problems to receive full credit. So like these, there were no steps to show, nothing to worry about. But on these down here, you can't just have this and then your answer. You've got to show me each step that you do. And some of them have, more than steps than others, but at least, at most, you're going to have 2 to 3 steps on each of them. So be sure to show all your work in order to receive full credit on your take-home quizzes.